first 5 chapters are book 1, and chapter 1 is called The Law of Human Nature. Well, what the heck is that? So question 1 for the group, just to get your gray matter moving around. Assuming we have all quarreled with someone in the past, maybe last week, what was the cause of the quarrel? Not necessarily the subject matter, but why would it be a quarrel? And second part, when we quarrel, do we use a comparison of some sort? If so, what is the standard?
Well,
for me, the cause of the quarrel is because other people just don't think like I do, which is the right way.
That's true.
Yeah,
Which implies
I think the word disagreement comes to mind. You're not in agreement on something.
The cause of my quarrel is always Rita.
well, no
Otherwise, I
names.
wouldn't quarrel.
No names.
That's why you're sitting in that chair.
No pointing.
Sometimes it's you haven't listened well enough to the other person to understand what they were really saying before you speak again. And I think sometimes there's just a miscommunication and struggling to get to the perfect communication where you're both listening to one another.
Sometimes you just disagree. And you're quarreling because you both think you're right.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't listen, but you still can be both listening and still not agree with each other.
Right.
in our personal case, I think oftentimes we just simply want to be right, but we have the knowledge that neither one of us is absolutely right. We just want to be.
I think that's a great point, Kat. I think for me, my fault in the past, and maybe still, is if I get dug in on something, the truth of the matter falls to the side, and my pride or my needing to be supported takes precedent.
I'm so glad to admit that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think also expectations that someone has of another person when they are not
living up.
Living up to it. Anyway, that can cause friction.
And that other person's lack of awareness of your expectations.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely right.
Yeah.
I guess as I have come down with age, sometimes I may be arguing with Kat on 10% of my brain capacity. Is not the thing that understanding is all that leads through it. I mean, be misinterpreting what I'm saying to myself.
Yeah. Wesley says things to himself, and then when he speaks out loud, it wasn't what he said to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we all interpret what someone else is saying, not having exactly their perceptions.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
I also think if you are tired and hungry, and you are not going to take things very well. I mean, our own health plays a role in how we can handle frustrations and difficulties. So
why is it so hard to admit I'm tired and hungry?
And you're making me mad.
Yeah.
That's the next step.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis says sometimes our attitude about things or the way we express ourselves has more to do with our digestion than actual rational thinking. Yeah, it's true. Because the way you feel right now is not necessarily an accurate representation of what you know or what you would say. All right, so there's a good responses there. Let's keep going. In this first chapter, there's a few quotes from Lewis. Quarreling means trying to show that another person is in the wrong. And sometimes that really takes precedence. I mean, that's human nature. And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he or she had some sort of agreement as to what, quote, right and wrong are. Just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer, soccer player, had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football. So behind our disagreements, there's usually some kind of standard, often, hopefully. And then he says, this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. Nowadays, when we talk of the laws of nature, we usually mean things like gravitation or heredity or the laws of chemistry. But when the older thinkers talked about this, they called the law of right and wrong the law of nature. They really meant the law of human nature. So I want us to think about what makes us tick. What is behind our human nature, especially when we agree or when we try to decide to come to a standard of right and wrong. Each person is at every moment subjected to several different sets of law, but there's only one of these which he or she is free to disobey. Laws of gravity cannot be disobeyed. If one is unsupported in midair, one has no more choice about falling than a stone. The law of human nature, the law peculiar to human nature, the law one does not share with animals or vegetables or inorganic things, the one we can disobey if we choose. Some say the ideal of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all is unsound because different civilizations in different ages have had quite different moralities. So he's trying to distinguish between natural laws like gravity, like Newtonian law, and the natural law where we kind of know a right and wrong, but we have a choice, right? Go ahead.
I thought it was very interesting that he further defined law, but he didn't say he was really doing that, because the way he defined a law was one in which you can break. In other words,
right.
He was saying the law of gravity is not really a law because you can't break it.
Right.
So let's see, I might be getting far afield from the question. What was the question, Tom?
Well, the law of nature, decent behavior is known all.
I completely agree with him from the standpoint that he was describing the law of nature. And finally, in chapter 3, I kept saying, don't you mean God? Don't you mean God?
Well, he does mean God, but he's also has to, when you do apologetics, you're also talking to people that don't believe in God, that
Right.
believe in materialism or just existentialism, where what we see, feel, measure is really all there is. And so is there really a law about our decision making?
Well,
and so
go
ahead.
He kept coming back to the fact that God is in everyone, whether they believe in him or not.
Sure, right.
And therefore that law of nature or the law of human nature is in everyone, just like if Paul said it, I think in Romans, about it doesn't matter whether the civilizations have known Jesus or not, because I have my law is in them, or the law is in them. There was something about
right. So he's saying this last bullet point before the question is, different civilizations and different ages have had quite different moralities. And that is true, but he explores it further. But so do you agree or disagree, and why the different ages and different cultures have different moralities?
Tom, let me, if I might,
Yeah.
let me ask a question in response to your question. And if it doesn't fit, we can move on.
Mhm.
Does this line of reasoning preclude situational ethics?
I think it involves situational ethics as one of the factors. I think it certainly would be in play.
You might
Yes.
explain situational ethics, at least give a brief definition. Carl.
The classic example is if you have 10 people in a survival boat from a shipwreck out in the middle of the ocean, and you only have enough food for 8, how do you decide which 2 to kick off the boat? Right? And so situational ethics says that decision's already made for you. You've got to get rid of 2 people. Some people like me would say, I reject situational ethics because you really cannot know when you're going to be saved. You really cannot know when another boat's coming along. There's some things that are in the hands of God. So I would not kick anyone off the boat. That would be immoral. But other people would argue just as vehemently that if 8 people are going to survive, you need to throw 2 overboard. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes
I'd like to
sense.
speak to that, but I want to give you another one.
Okay.
Is more severe, and it's the one that I use frequently. My son and I are walking down a street in Washington, D.C. in the dark, and we're accosted by a mugger who has a gun. And it's clear that he is under the influence, and he is going to kill one of us.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no doubt about it. And he says to my son, give me your money or I'm going to shoot you right now. And
Yeah.
I've got a way to kill him immediately. Not my son, but the mugger.
Yeah.
All right. Do I kill the mugger?
I
Though
know.
I might be
Good one.
totally opposed. I mean, to the core of my being, opposed to killing.
Right.
Will my son die and hold on to my ethic, or do I kill the mugger?
You give them your
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
If he's true to his word.
Can we go get some more?
You runs away. Well, here.
I don't have any
The
money.
bank's just down the way.
Yeah. What if he didn't have any money and the guy didn't believe him?
You
I
understand?
sort of thought situational ethics was a little bit like Carl said, which is, I don't approve of A, but yet in certain circumstances, I feel like A is the right thing. Things are not always black and white. All the rules
Yeah.
are not always black and
situations.
white. And I thought that's what situational ethics was.
In certain instances, A is the only rational choice. And that kind of brings up what C.S. Lewis is saying, because A is morally wrong, air quotes, but this is a situation where you've got to depart from that standard you already know lies behind your own being, your own personal ethics. Yeah, I mean that's a good way to think of
I
it.
mean, it's wrong to kill people, I think, in general.
Right.
It's wrong to kill people. But
Yeah.
but what if you're in a situation where somebody's going to kill a bunch of people, or even just one person?
Well, and
But
with
they'll kill a bunch of people and you can stop them by you killing them. Then you've got
Yeah.
to make that decision, and that's the situation. What's right in that situation.
To me, it also depends on how manipulative the scenario is that someone gives you that forces you into a choice. You have to decide, is this really something where I'm going to have to choose something I totally disbelieve in or not? And to me, some situational ethics goes overboard. The case you and Carl talking about is not overboard. What if you were being mugged and you knew killing was wrong? And what I usually add in, what if Lulu was with us and Lulu was put in danger? Well, you know what? It wouldn't be much of a choice for me. I'd have to choose a violent course if I had to.
I'd like to say that I want to end up on Tom's boat if you're not going to throw everybody over.
Yeah, yeah, right,
We'll just dangle people over the side and let the
Right.
sharks come after you. All right.
But how does this idea tie into that third bullet point when you're talking about different eras and civilizations? Is there something that's in common with this for all
Yeah.
humans, no matter when they live or where?
I just
Right.
go
All
back
right,
to
let's
what
keep
Lewis
going.
he said, yes, it is common to all because I'm in them. Whether you act on it, whether you agree to go to that place that you say, not my will, but thine.
Yeah. I think the
And-
whole idea we're debating quote unquote situational ethics reveals there is a standard that everyone sort of agrees with. And so here's the
Well-
next graphic. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Hold on. Victoria was going to say something.
Victoria
Yeah,
has
go
something
ahead.
in here to do.
I'm just recognizing in Lewis's point that we're all saying there is a right and a wrong. And even
Yeah.
as the situation gets more intense with Lulu, you know, what is that higher right? What is the wrong within each situation? And that's based on something. And every culture throughout history has recognized there are certain ways that we have to relate to one another so that we don't kill each other over everything.
Yeah.
It's got to be based on something that's right or
Right.
wrong. And where does that come from? Who gives us that?
Right.
Let me,
Right.
Read it.
Yeah, I just wonder though, if indeed all the civilizations have indeed agreed to what is right or what is wrong.
You don't have to.
I mean, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. I mean, that has been very much part of us in the past, some
Yeah.
civilizations.
And that's a good point. So I think what I'm trying to say is there's a recognition within the civilizations that within our givens, there's a right and a wrong in how we order ourselves.
I think it comes
Yeah.
down to their own self-preservation in their time and place. They do what's necessary to keep things moving peacefully or whatever, and you know, keep each other alive as it applies to their own situation.
Mhm.
if I could, let me pick up on Lucy's point, because there's an issue that is still
Oh.
debated very hotly today. When we dropped 3 nuclear weapons on Japan,
2.
I'm sorry, 2, there is still tremendous,
Savannah's happy.
there's still tremendous discord about should we have done that.
Yeah.
Of course, the argument for doing it is it ended the war. And
Okay.
had we had to invade Japan, which would have been the next step, how many hundreds of thousands of people, Japanese and Americans, would have been killed? Well, we killed a whole lot of Japanese by dropping the bomb.
Yeah.
And so the discussions that I've heard really end up saying what I know that everybody in EFM got so tired of hearing, which was, it's complicated.
It is.
It's complicated. Those situations, which are, I think, fall under the rubric of situational ethics, make issues like natural law interesting to talk about, but it gets
Yeah.
complicated. I
Well,
Yeah.
and at some point, a decision has to be made. And there are
At the
going to-
time, not looking back like we
That's
can.
right. And the
Right.
consequences are going to come
yeah.
with any decision that is made. And I guess the decision for dropping the bomb was, this is going to stop it. And yes, there will be ramifications, but the president was saying, I can take it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, the rest of the world had to take it too.
I think another good example is if you've been to the Lincoln Memorial and see what's etched on the wall inside where Lincoln talked he quoted the Old Testament and said, woe, sometimes terrible things need to come, but woe to those by whom these things came. And he talked about how can one side justify killing others peoples when the other side justifies, benefiting over the backs of slavery, people who were in slavery. And he called it all sin.
Yeah.
So we're not debating sin versus sinlessness.
Right.
By the time you get to that kind of situational ethics, it's sin. It's falling short of the mark. We've already fallen short of what God intended. And Lincoln made that clear. If you ever want to go look at what's written, I think it was his third inaugural address. But it's kind of a similar thing. All right, so here's some more quotes. There have been differences between moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teachings of, say, ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him is how very like they are to each other and to our own. It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may sometimes be mistaken about them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong, but they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication tables. So the question is, do you agree or disagree? Yeah.
I want to say, where does the idea of values, people's personal values, come into this conversation and this argument about right or wrong? We all know the right and the wrong, but some people might value life more than not, or value, certain decisions and choices.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really touch on that, but this whole listening to everybody makes me think about, people shoot people dead every day. And
yeah.
It's because they have a belief they have a value system that's a little different, and it makes them act on it.
Yeah.
It's a value of them over another. And not.
I thought it was interesting that one of the traits that he quoted that he thought most of the civilizations probably adhered to was they did not like selfishness. And, if you're putting others before yourself, you're not going to want to kill someone else unless it's a case such as you were quoting earlier of circumstances. And I thought the other thing that he mentioned was fairness. That perhaps, that's what I read in chapter 6, that those two traits might be traits that you find in all of the times and civilizations that they valued.
Yeah.
Because in dealing with one another, you want to deal with someone who will treat you fairly, because that's what you expect and hopefully in turn demonstrate.
That's a good point. And he did use that as an example. He said two different constituencies could be fighting and arguing over something. And they could even say, well, your standards are different than mine. And we're never going to be able to come to agree on that. And then someone will try to strike a compromise or make some kind of a proposal. And Lewis says, inevitably, one side or the other will say, that's not fair. And what he's saying, and everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows that somehow there's not equity here. And so Lewis is saying, everybody in the room knows that everybody knows some standard of fair that transcends any of the individual arguments. So do you think that's right? Do you think that's true? And where do we get that?
Little kids know that right away.
Sure.
I think we get that from our culture, because I think I can't give you an example, but I think some things that might seem fair or unfair to us might not seem that way to excuse me, to other cultures.
Yeah. Lewis used an example. He was so well read. I mean, if you start reading him, you'll know how many different cultures he knew about through their religions and other things. He said he never, ever, ever met a culture where when they were forced to go to war or to defend their community, where it was a positive thing to be afraid and run away from the enemy. There's never a poem that upholds the person who saved his own life because he ran away from danger. Well, think of that. I mean, running away from danger is self-preservation. It's what evolution and Darwinism would have given us as a base value. But yet, cultures uphold courage and sacrifice. And he says, I'm not as well read, that every culture pretty much he encountered upholds that value. So the question remains, where did that come from if they're all the same in that way?
But maybe that goes back to self-preservation. How are you going to survive as a country or a group if you don't have that thought?
Yeah.
To run away or stand and fight?
To stand and
right. But what if your ethics say you should never kill? See, there's still something that in Lewis's, I'm just speaking for Lewis because he makes this argument. He said there's something that transcends the details of who's dying and who's not. And that is, there's this thing of courage, and there's this thing about sacrificing for those people you love. So let's keep moving on. We're on the right track. So Lewis argues there's something other than our contrived or learned behaviors. All right, so he talks about some objections that he received when he tried to make this idea that there's this moral law behind all of humanity. And it said, moral law is simply one of our instincts. Some people say, well, that's just your instinct. If two instincts are in conflict and there's nothing in a creature's mind except those two instincts, obviously the stronger of the two must win. But at those moments when we are most conscious of the moral law, it usually seems to be telling us to side with the weaker of the two impulses. That's on page 8. Moral law is, and then the second objection to his thesis is the moral law is just social convention, something put there by education, learned from parents and teachers. And it must be a human invention. That would be moral law is just a social convention. Or nowadays you hear about a social construct. So do you see the difference in those two things and why they're objections to what Lewis was trying to say?
But what is instinct?
Instinct would be like me wanting to protect Lulu.
Right.
So I'm going to take a club and beat someone over the head if they're about ready to attack Lulu.
Where did you get that? I mean, when he says it's instinct, I understand that, but where did that
These are
come
the
from?
objections. These are what people are saying about objecting to his thought about moral, the law of human.
These are,
is that right?
This chapter is called Some Objections. These are people that are objecting to Lewis's contention that there is a moral law that undergirds everything. That's not human made. Like a bird, animals will defend their young, even to endangering themselves. So their instinct for survival is superseded by their instinct. We saw bluebirds dive bombing a squirrel who was getting close to their babies that were about ready to fledge. So there's two competing instincts: the survival of the bluebird, the adult bluebird, and their instinct to protect their young. Does that make sense? And sometimes those two instincts will work against each other.
Sure. Rita's got a
No, I guess I don't know how to voice it. But Yeah, instincts. Where are instincts a part of us? Is that in conflict? Is he saying that's in conflict with moral law?
I don't think Lewis is saying that's in conflict with moral law. It may be in conflict, it may not be, but some people are saying some people are saying everything that comprises your morality and your ethics is either instinct or moral law. There was one other they mentioned, but we didn't have time for that. But those are the two big ones, that it's either instinct or a learned behavior, a social convention, that there is nothing else. That's the
Okay.
materialist view,
Mm-hmm.
right? As opposed to a religionist view.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's go to the next one because he keeps elaborating on this.
Mm-hmm.
So Lewis says, of the first objection that your ethics are really just your instincts. Morals are simply from our instincts. Lewis notes, quote, feeling a desire to help is different from feeling you ought to, whether you want to or not. But if two instincts are in conflict, there's nothing in a creature's mind except those two instincts. Obviously, stronger of the two instincts must win. And Mary, what was that one we just heard where, well, you remember that plane that went down in Washington and water was freezing, there was ice in the water, and some people did die, and there were a couple people out in the middle of the water and they were about ready to go under, and some man on the shore dove in to ice cold water and swam out and saved as many people as he could.
Mm-hmm.
His instinct for survival would say, man, if I dive in that water, I'm going to die. His other instinct, which you would think would be the recessive, the weaker instinct, is, well, I really ought to go in there and try and save that woman. So what is it in that man that made him dive into that water? And people have dove into the water and done things like that, and they have died doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense as an example? Where you can have two conflicting instincts?
Okay.
The ones in war where, there's replete Medal of Honor winners where four soldiers were in a foxhole and a grenade is thrown in, and one of them throws himself over the grenade, kills himself to save the rest of them. There are so many examples of that.
There's a young man in Tom's hometown who did that.
Yeah. He's a Medal of Honor winner, and there's now a guided missile destroyer named after him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he, in Iraq, some guy they were capturing and trying to put into a car, threw out a grenade. And what was his name, Mary?
Dunham.
Jason Dunham. He threw his helmet on the grenade and dove on it with his stomach. And he ended up dying. But he saved everyone around him.
I think of the
Titanic.
Titanic.
What made him,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, Tom, let me ask you. I mean, if birds have this instinct to take care of their own, then, and their survival would be, oh my gosh, we'll just let any animal come and get them. Then, and if they go after, if they use their instinct to do that, then is it a part of, wouldn't it be a part of our instinct to do that?
I think it would be a part of our instinct. And somewhere in the chapter, he makes a distinction between, I think, between us, sentient beings who understand a spiritual side of us, and animals who do not. So yes, the case of the bluebird is pure instinct. He's questioning, isn't humanity more than pure instinct? That makes sense? That it's present in both. I mean, we're biological beings, but we're also spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says in the third paragraph, those moments when we are most conscious of the moral law, meaning the law that undergirds all the other laws, it usually seems to be telling us to side with the weaker of the two impulses. That's one of Lewis's conclusions.
And that
I guess
impulse, and that impulse would be to not
To
think of
dive on a
yourself.
grenade.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
not think of yourself, but to put someone else forward.
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, there's no doubt. I think we've all known people who are so profoundly altruistic that they will sacrifice things of their own in support of others. I mean, I can think of people I know that will really go out of their way to help others to their own detriment.
Yeah.
And they're called to do it. You just recognize that they're called to do it.
Ah, they're called. What is that? Is there some law? Is that part of some law
God,
of human nature?
I hope
I think
not.
it's Southwestern Bell. No, that's old.
They hear a moral call. They
Yes.
they feel a moral duty.
That's the moral law Lewis is talking about. Moral as opposed to instinct or just physical laws like gravity.
I think
He's
so.
saying there is a law that we have a choice. He's saying there's a law of human nature. We have a choice to obey or not.
I'm going to be really mercenary about this one, though. There is a philosophy in business that's called enlightened self-interest.
Yeah.
And what it basically means is you, as a company, don't make as much money as you could otherwise, and your people know, your customers know it, or you do things that cost you money and your customers know it, and in the long run, you're building loyalty. And in the end, that enlightened self-interest means that you do, in fact, compromise and sacrifice because you know that it works to your advantage in the long run. And it may be that the Creator has imparted in us this willingness for self-sacrifice because the Creator knows that in the long run, society as a whole will be much better off if it works together and doesn't try to maximize every individual doesn't try to maximize every moment, but is willing to give back to the community, give back to the society. Maybe that is programmed in us.
Yeah. I mean, that could be part of survival instinct if people can understand the long-term view as opposed to a short-term.
Right. Right.
Possibly.
So am I understanding then that Lewis is saying that impulses are
Impulses or instincts.
instincts
Yeah.
are always selfish, as he has talked about. Is he saying that instincts are always selfish? Am I making?
I don't know. I see what you're saying. I don't know if he's saying that exactly. I think some instincts don't have to be selfish. I think some instincts are stronger or weaker. And what is it that would make us choose the weaker one?
The instinct to save your child, that's not selfish.
Okay,
Unless,
you're right.
by definition, he's somehow
But
saying
to put yourself in danger to protect your child when the instinct of self-preservation is probably the monumental one. You know, you have to give that one up to then step in to help the child.
Yeah.
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 I mean, that's a
But
good way
that
to put
is-
it, Mary. Yeah. I was going to say, it may be one way we are different than animals. Many animals act out of purely or mostly purely instinct. They will do whatever it takes for them to survive. And yes, they're young too. But humans do things that are not just out of instinct. I think Lewis is
I'm
saying.
thinking of a Secret Service agent And the time has come where he's going to have to take that bullet for the president. He's doing it because of duty, because it's his job, or
Yeah.
because that's what he feels is the moral thing to do also.
Mhm.
Didn't that happen with Reagan, actually?
That's what made me think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
Now, was it Brady?
Mhm.
Jim Brady?
I think it was.
I think you're on the
Yeah,
right
they
track. All right, let's go to the next slide. This
Okay.
thing that judges between doing, as Lewis says in page 8, this thing that judges between two instincts cannot itself be either of them. You might as well say that a sheet of music which tells you to play one note on the piano, not another, is itself one of the notes on the keyboard. The moral law tells us the tune we have to play. Our instincts are merely the keys. And to me, that's another way of seeing the big picture and maybe seeing the long term as opposed to just the immediate dilemma. He says, every note is right at one time and wrong at another. The moral law is not any one instinct or set of instincts. It is something which makes a kind of tune. The tune we will call goodness or right conduct by directing the instincts. What do you think? What do you think of this analogy?
Well, I do know that if you play all of the notes that you want to play, it will not sound very pretty. It will be.
Especially if someone else is doing the same thing.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you play them without regard to passion, without
Right.
regard
And it-
to soul,
It doesn't make the notes wrong. It's just in their order.
they'll be in order. You'll play the right notes, but it won't be very moving. But put the hands of a master on the keyboard, and you can't compare the two outcomes.
But what if we don't like the same kind of music?
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't make the notes wrong.
No,
Individually, no.
they're diminished.
But if everyone is agreed onto a certain piece to play, then you need to be on the same page and the same script and the same story.
Right. If
Right.
Rita decides that we're going to sing a certain song on Sunday, but then 5 of the choir say, oh, we're going to sing a different song at the same time,
It's happened.
we might not be able to track.
It happens.
When Georgia was there.
What page are we on?
That was a note.
Oh, sorry.
So another question I put in there is, how can we be in tune with the moral law? One answer for me is do what Jesus would do. I mean, didn't Jesus give us the storyline, the tune, in a certain respect?
Listen to your conscience.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I see two beings that are just out there, and God saying, "Don't do this," and then they do it, and all of a sudden things get complicated because all these different instincts come together, and they start going like with this each other, and people have to make choices, and the choices could be good, and the choice could be terrible.
Right.
I mean,
Adam
how often do you read in the newspaper about the people who they watched this poor woman get beat up and didn't do anything, and then you find in the next day here's an article of the people who helped this woman and were so nice and generous and all that.
Right.
But I see this as moral choice coming all the difference between right and wrong, and sometimes the right might be wrong, and sometimes the right might be right. I mean, it got confusing after the two of them made the apple.
Yep. Adam and Eve wanted to be obedient to God, but they also wanted to know this thing about the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
They want to know the secrets.
And so God is showing us by all of this stuff, you're all right. Now you know what it's like to be God.
Right. Now what are you going to do? And,
Now
and
what are you
here,
gonna
I'll
do?
give you a guide. Now you open the can of worms. Now I'm going to show you how to navigate the can of worms.
So you're going to know now. This is what happens. Maybe
All right.
that
The
makes
second objection, the moral law is simply social convention. That all your morality is simply what your parents told you and what your teachers told you. There isn't anything more. Lewis asked if a multiplication was merely a social convention. He says, no. You can give all these different answers to the multiplication tables, but some of them are going to be right and some of them are going to be wrong. Driving on the left or right side of the road, that's a social convention. That's not a real right and wrong. But he says moral law belongs to the first category. He says there really is an objective. Lewis believes there really is an objective right and wrong. Differences between the moral ideas of our time or country are not very great, not nearly so great as most people imagine. And you can recognize the same law running through all of them, he said. If no set of, he gave some examples, but you'll have to, you have to read the chapter. If no set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, there would be no sense in preferring civilized morality to savage morality or Christian morality to Nazi morality. So in other words, purely relative morality can't be right. I mean, if everything is relative, why were the Nazis wrong? And remember, he wrote these when the Nazis could have won the war. Why not racial purity? Why not one race being a master over the other races? I mean, in one respect, in terms of procreating your own culture and multiplying your own culture, that would be exactly what you'd want to do. And yet, lots of people, even Germans, knew there was something wrong with this. Agree or disagree?
Oh, I agree there, but I'm not sure that even within our own culture, people would agree to the truer or better of those moral
Right.
ideas.
Yeah, that may be the whole burden of life, is making those decisions every day.
Take the very, very simple example, and I say that not so much tongue in cheek as it might in a moment seem like I was. Take the very, very simple example of slavery. I don't think of those of us here, there would be much disagreement that slavery was a really, really bad thing. And that the people that were slaves were profoundly disadvantaged. If that disadvantage has lingered 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, are the ancestors of those slaves in fact diminished today?
You mean the descendants?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the descendants of those slaves diminished today as a result of their ancestors being slaves. There are a group of people who profoundly believe that they are significantly diminished, that they have and continue to pay a price for their ancestors being enslaved. There's another group of people who profoundly believe that they are no more disadvantaged than anybody born poor today, and that they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps just like anybody else can, and that all they're looking for is a handout. And both of those two groups are adamant in their interpretation of the moral law of right and wrong. Is it right to help those in need by giving them an advantage? Or is it more immoral to give them such help and punish others, make others pay for that? So I'm going to end up with this statement. It's complicated. Moral law sounds good, but it's complicated. It's not as clear, I believe, It's not as clear as it might first seem, I believe.
And I would add, for me and for my belief in the Christian way is, what is my role, regardless of who it is I meet that might need my help? What is my role? Seems pretty clear. You know, the big picture is hard to solve all at once. Who can do that? But my little steps in my world, when I meet someone in need, I can make that moral law should be pretty clear to me.
That's
And
been.
if we took the small steps, the big steps might start solving themselves.
I agree. That's been Charette saving that one starfish.
Yeah.
You behave, you act out. I think everybody here would try to act out daily what Jesus would do. Do the right thing. In that sense, the law is pretty clear.
Including recognizing that certain ethnic groups are disadvantaged. I mean, that is not hard to perceive, I don't think, right?
How to deal with it.
I would disagree.
Well, okay. I mean, there's some people that refuse.
I guess I'm just not sure that everyone would have that same moral compass that I have. And I will just speak for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, so we've got to communicate with each other.
And I think people get dug in on their opinions and attitudes instead of expanding the thought of helping someone else. And so I think that can cause some tension and friction.
Yeah.
If I don't help someone else who has less than me, but I also don't hurt anyone, am I a bad person?
You could never be a bad person.
No, but in this conversation.
No, Alice, you can never be a bad person.
No, but I mean, in this conversation, you know, like if I don't go out of my way to help, but I also don't hurt, I just stay to myself. Am I lacking in something? Is my moral self weak?
Are you diminished in some way?
Say that again, Carl?
Are you diminished in some way?
Right.
Because you didn't. I think that's a wonderful question. And I think a lot of us point a finger at ourselves all the time. Could I have done more? Should I have done more? Should I have stopped? You know, Wesley has taught me a lot of lessons, and one of them is that it's easy to be nice to the nice.
Yeah.
When Jesus said,
it's not so easy to be nice to those that are a horse's patoot.
and
But
Jesus
I also
said,
think-
the pagans did that.
I think asking the question is healthy in itself.
Yeah.
Because by asking the question, you're saying, maybe I could do better.
That's exactly.
And if you do ask that question, you got a chance of doing it. If you don't even ask the question, then it's worse.
And then
I
it
think
just
that's-
makes it might be that you don't help in that certain situation, but it broadens your awareness for the next situation. And then the next one do that.
Isn't that what Jesus meant by planting the mustard seed? I mean, that I think Alice, the struggle is the thing. The struggle of each step of our life and seeing the next thing that comes in our path is the thing. That is our job. And to me, that mustard seed that was planted way back when I started working with at-risk kids, I mean, that changed my whole life. Did I know it at the time? No. And I would, and I've struggled with the same questions. But that's okay. That's a good thing. Let me read a couple. Oh, go ahead.
Just a real quick one. One of the things that a friend and I remarked on today, which I think bears here, is, and to Alice, to your point, the Creator doesn't expect perfection from us. I'm convinced.
That's good.
The Creator asks for perseverance. What Bill just said, I think, is the answer. The fact that you ask the question is a good thing because it allows you to become introspective.
Yeah. And if you remember, when Jesus was confronted, he often addressed a question with another question. What do you think? What do you think you should do the next time you encounter the Samaritan or the woman caught in adultery? Right?
Rich young lawyer.
The struggle is the thing. What?
Such an irritating thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me read the next slide. Chapter 3, the reality of the law. Lewis says 2 odd things about the human race. First, we are haunted by the idea of a sort of behavior we ought to practice: fair play, decency, morality, or the law of nature. Second, humans, we, did not in fact do so. Is this why we all have the small laws? The United States laws, the state constitutions? I say it is. Lewis has said this. He says, when you fail to keep the big laws, it makes necessary all the small laws. Think about that. If we all really treated our neighbors as we would be treated ourselves, we wouldn't need all the small laws. To me, that's a pretty interesting way to think about it. One example I think we talk about, we know being selfish is often, quote, wrong, even though being selfish, we will materially and emotionally reward ourselves, right? Moral law, he says, I messed up. Not a fact in the ordinary sense. It begins to look as if we must admit there is more than one kind of reality. In this particular case, there is something above and beyond ordinary facts of our behavior, yet quite definitely real, a real law which none of us made, but which we find pressing on us. Alice, what you talked about, that little kernel, that little irritant of something I didn't do when I could have, I met someone, maybe next time I'll do better. We do find this law pressing on us, at least I do. So I agree. Do you all disagree or disagree with that?
I agree.
Agree.
All right.
Yeah.
Chapter 4 is, go ahead, Mary. I don't want to rush.
No, I mean, even Paul addressed that. He says the things what is it? He says, I know the things I need to do, but I don't do them.
And he doesn't know why he doesn't do them.
Yeah,
Right.
but somehow or another, something stops him, stops us. And, fortunately, we do get more chances.
To inject a bit of humor here, you need to memorize that verse.
I do. Thank you.
Yeah, that.
The things I hate, I think you said,
Just go right
I
on
think
ahead.
he said, I think he says the things I hate, I do. The things I do the things that I do, I hate. Something like that. Anyway.
I love getting in those
Right.
things.
I don't know if he said all those, but anyway, go ahead.
Well,
I should look it up now. Someone look that up.
I'm sorry.
But he did. He go ahead. Sorry.
I think that he sums it up a little bit later when he says progress means not just changing, but changing for the better. So we have these ideas, as Alice was talking about, and it occurs to us, dawns on us that maybe I could have done it differently. And if we learn from that and go on and use that in a good way, then we've progressed.
Okay, I have a quote. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, I do. That's what he's saying. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good.
Right. And he even called it law. Yeah, that was Romans 7. Yep.
Yeah. As it is no longer myself who do it, but it is the sin living in me.
Mhm.
Right. So it's a higher calling because, way back when, those things that, they're just sometimes you just don't want to help someone. It is inconvenient. It is going to put yourself out. It is going to make you late. It's gonna, all of those things, but it's imperative to go ahead and do it.
And he even calls it law. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. So, I mean, Paul is definitely, C.S. Lewis is kind of repeating Paul in Romans here, I think. That there is something that speaks to us, even if we've never read the Bible. I think there's something that tells us it's wrong to be cruel to a dog, or be cruel to our neighbor,
Or a child.
or
anyone.
or a child.
We
We didn't have to be taught that, according to this law.
It's called the golden rule.
Say that again.
Huh? Yeah.
The golden rule.
Yes.
Mhm. I know, and
All right,
yet
so-
there are some people who are. They are cruel to dogs. They are cruel to children. They are cruel to everyone other than themselves. And I think maybe in essence, they are cruel to themselves when they're that way. And so what law
Yeah.
are they following?
Well, I think that opens up a whole can of worms towards psychological concepts and constructs that we're really not able to talk about in this class.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think your mind can get off track, and yeah, that is psychological issues. This next slide, we've talked about some of this. And B is the religious view is what lies behind the universe is more like a mind than anything else we know. Universe is more like a mind, partly for purposes we do not yet know, partly in order to produce creatures like itself, to the extent of having minds. That means God made creatures like himself. I think we're getting towards the end. It's not a scientific question. If there is something behind, then either it will have to remain altogether unknown to men, or else make itself known in some different way. The question is, did God make known to us God's law? And obviously Lewis thinks he did. I argued with people before. Can mention me arguing with anyone. That the people say the universe is just this random thing, that we're just, atoms in the primordial ooze got together and creatures were developed and we crawled up out of it and we became human beings. And for you to believe that that's it, that's all there is, doesn't that mean that there's not really a purpose behind anything? Because there was no purpose giver. Someone used the example of, to think that we developed completely at random by accident is like spilling a box of alphabets out on the floor and you got the play of Hamlet randomly, accidentally spelled out on the floor. Some scientists have even said that's about what the odds would be of us developing the way we are and having it be completely at random. And I don't know, I just think that's a great example that there is some kind of a purpose behind us. Thought we would do some more reading, but I don't know, we're getting past time here. So do you think we could have developed where we are and it just be completely random with nothing behind it? Because that is the other argument.
Well, Carl and I were talking about this evening earlier, and part of that has to do with what you mean by random.
I mean, by pure chance, by just
No order.
atoms and molecules colliding with each other like stars, and particles of dust in the universe collide with each other, and that it just so happens that carbon combined with oxygen and hydrogen and it created water, and poof, after billions of years, there's us.
How much?
That would be a random.
And that would have to happen over and over again for us to create more of us.
Katie, remind me of how random our genes are.
Oh, I'm not sure I know exactly what you're saying.
I know
you're talking about DNA and all of that, but I'm not sure where you're trying to go.
Well, I'll try to say it then. We get half of our genes from our mothers and half from our fathers. And the ones that we get are random. And from our mother, and the ones we get from our fathers are random. So there is chance in the creation of each individual. But the evolution of individuals probably wasn't so much chance, but if you've ever done any kind of genetic experiments with plants, any breeding, selective breeding, you know that it takes a long time to get the trait that you're looking for. So there's elements of chance in terms of what it takes to breed. So if you believe in evolution, if you believe in the power of evolution, but are a devout Christian, then the beliefs that lead to the answers to Tom's question are complicated. If I am my dear brother Jim Ferguson down in Florida, it is not complicated. The world was created about 3,000 years ago, and it's just the way it is because God made it that way. And he deeply believes that. And I know I've probably misstated it, but I'm not going to argue with him because I don't know. Like, I know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Y'all can put money on it. The sun will come up and it'll rise in the east. I know that. I don't know the answer to Tom's question. I have a belief. I have faith in a tradition. But I think it's one of those magical things that is complicated. And I think the Creator gave us the brain, I believe, to figure out that it's complicated. And hopefully it make us more tolerant.
And another thing he said later in this chapter is, this isn't properly solved as a scientific question. If there is a God outside of nature that made us, we are not going to prove God by studying nature in a scientific sense. We are, he said, we are sort of we're part of the inside story. We are made in God's image so that we have God in us. And if that's true, then we have some knowledge of God that's not a scientific measurement. He said, for us to try and prove God by science would be like a character in Hamlet trying to prove Shakespeare by talking to the other characters in Hamlet. The evidence of Shakespeare is all through the play, because Shakespeare wrote in a certain way. He had certain messages he conveyed in his writings. Because you can't, two characters within the story can't prove Shakespeare. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it did to me. that we're part of a story that has something behind it that God means to do, or not. Or we're just passing through a random thing and this is all there is. And when we die, we're worm food. As one of my friends always said.
Could be.
So it is an article of faith to believe there's something behind us that teaches us, apart from simply our instincts or simply our culturation, learned behavior through our parents and our teachers. And Lewis, who was an atheist until he was 32, and he tried for a decade or more to disprove God, finally said, no, there's more to us than just survive, just survival instinct. And so this is part of what he wrote and said over his radio addresses during World War II, when the British people thought they might not exist as a British people anymore within another year. I think that's powerful stuff. It was for me. So I know we rushed through the ending part of that, but thank you for any other parting comments?
Your gift.
Oh, Lewis is a gift. He just, he thinks things that I thought, and I guess that's how we speak to each other. If we can sort of think what each other thinks. somehow.
Tom, at the risk of asking you to put at the risk of me asking you to put what am I trying to say? I'm probably going to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to ask you if you believe so.
All right.
Are most of these issues pretty complicated?
What?
Oh,
I didn't hear all that.
Are most of the issues that we've talked about tonight complicated? Or
Yes. And the struggle for me is the fun part. Who would want us to be all automatons where everything is just spoon fed and everyone agrees and we just, oh yeah. There's a lot of
I kind of
science fiction. There's a lot of science fiction.
Times.
There's dystopian stories where everyone is just fixed and planned and it's just a boring picture where if we all disagreed with everything and we're all in an automatic path of behavior, that's not what God created.
It isn't so much to be an automaton or to have things just go smoothly, but it is to have some discourse where there isn't this irritation or this anger that comes from a discourse. That I feel that, and then people are not kind to one another. That is far more distressing to me than dealing with an issue. It's the emotion or the power or the anger towards the person that holds a differing opinion that bothers me.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to de-escalate that or calm that down so that you can get to the heart of the matter and then feel that it isn't so complicated, that it is something that we can come together and work toward.
Irritation in itself isn't bad. We wouldn't get pearls if there wasn't irritation.
Yes, but that's in some
What do you do? It is everyone's going to be irritated. Who here has been irritated by someone along the line?
Oh.
So, but what do you do with it?
They don't even have to be in the same room and I'm irritated with them.
But truly, what do you do with it? How do you make lemonade out of it or pearls instead of destruction?
After 48 years, Rita's learned how to be irritated
I
real
can
well.
do it really good.
Oh,
Bill,
you
you're a
learn how to
pearl.
go into the next room.
I have a very close personal friend that if I want to irritate quickly, all I have to say is, I know that's what you believe.
And she raises her hand. Okay.
Which is usually followed by the reply, and I'm right.
And I know that's what I believe.
Well, Tom, you have done a great job tonight.
Well, thank you. That was a lot. And so next week I'm going to be on the way back from New York, or hopefully I'll be here by 7. So y'all make sure you come up with some questions. Write a quote or two of your own down you want to discuss, and maybe I'll have something prepared, but I'll be in transit. I'm going up to New York for my mom's 92nd birthday. So.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
And where should we read next?
What instincts do you have on that?
I made sure I bought my mom flowers already. And I think I'm in good with her. So chapter 5 is we have cause to be uneasy. Well, we've already covered some of that tonight. Then book 2, what Christians believe. So let's do 2 or 3. Let's read at least up to chapter 3 in book 2. I don't see us doing more than 3 or 4 chapters. So it's rival conceptions of God, the invasion, and a shocking alternative. So thank you everyone for showing up. No one need think they can't come either because they didn't read it or because they weren't here last week. We're gonna put it out there for discussion no matter what.